Hello everybody, Catchy1383 with Catchy Gaming, and this is my review of Hogwarts Legacy. Let's start with some background. I am familiar with the Harry Potter universe, having read all 6 books, watched all 6 movies, and Fantastic Beasts. I also read The Timeless Child, but I don't exactly consider that canon, and I'm pretty sure it's not. I wasn't exactly where to start this review since the Harry Potter universe carries with it some baggage due to the movies and the books. And one of the things I was definitely afraid of is that it was going to be fan service the game and not so much actual game. And there are parts of this game that I can honestly point to and say they did this because of the movies and or books. But I think a good place to start would probably be the sorting ceremony, mainly due to that definitely being one of the key points that people are looking for in a Harry Potter game, where you create your own character and you sort of want to be like, yeah, I know what house I'm going to be in if I were in the Harry Potter universe. So unfortunately, I don't have any footage for the sorting ceremony for the first character I made, and I made 3 other characters after that to earn all the achievements. For my first character, I was sorted into Slytherin. I don't remember if I answered any more questions, but on the other 3 characters that I made after, it only asked me one question, and it always sorted me into Slytherin afterwards. And it didn't even matter how I answered the question either, it was always Slytherin. And I was a bit disappointed because I wanted to find out what answers to which questions landed you in which house. Granted, you are able just to choose what house you want to be in, so it's not a big problem. And I have my suspicions that it might be because I tied my Hogwarts Legacy game to my Harry Potter fan club account. And I guess on a more positive note, there's no Quidditch. I know there's some people who are probably upset by that, but I think Quidditch is dumb. Or I should clarify that I think the rules for Quidditch are dumb. So when you choose what house you're going to be in, it has no real difference in functionality. In terms of the game, all it really does is determine what common rooms you have access to and what color your school robes are going to be. With one exception, that it has a minor part in the main story that differs between the different houses. And as much as people like to knock on Hufflepuff, they actually probably have one of the better dorm rooms with the warm earth textures and greenery, along with one of the cooler entrances to their common rooms in comparison to some of the others. I also like the Slytherin common room aesthetic. Its dark, moody colors along with the green, it just easier on my eyes, and that's why I particularly like it. So after the sorting ceremony and you're taken to your dorm, and your character has a good night's sleep, you meet Professor Weasley again the next morning, and this is where the game really begins. Yes, they had a prologue that introduced basic movement and basic combat, along with the premises for the story. But the one thing I'm pretty sure a lot of people were looking forward to is exploring Hogwarts and the surrounding area. And because video games are a visual medium that you can interact with, they had to take some liberties with the layout of the school and how it's set up. And in some cases, they're not going to align with the movie and probably not with the books because some parts of the books are just not described, so they had a creative license to make said assets for the game. And I guess a good example of this would be the grand stairwell. In the books and in the movie, the stairs moved on the students. In this, they just sort of pop in and out of existence. And that's due to game design. Yes, it's lore in the Harry Potter universe, but it'd be kind of inconvenient for people who are trying to run around and actually play the game to have to deal with the whims of random stair movements. So I get why they didn't do it like they did in the movies or described in the books. So the next day, Professor Weasley meets up with your character again, and then they introduce the field guide. In terms of the overall story, it's supposed to be keeping track of your progress as a student at Hogwarts. Functionally, it keeps track of all the collectible items that you can find throughout the whole entire game. After she gives you the book, you follow her and they introduce the use of flue powder networks within the castle and throughout the whole entire game, which I thought was a neat link between the actual lore of the Harry Potter universe and game mechanics. They act as fast travel locations throughout the whole entire game. Professor Fig then gives your character a map for Hogwarts, and it appears as a mini-map in the bottom left-hand corner. I didn't find it particularly useful due to how zoomed in it is, and you can use your field guide to take you wherever you want in the castle without ever having to look at the mini-map. It is useful in the open world to keep track of where enemies are. Outside of that, its functionality isn't exactly that useful. On top of that, the map screen for Hogwarts Castle that shows all the Flu networks feels like it was a lost opportunity where they could have combined the two and did something along the lines of the Marauders map. I know I was cautious about fan service being used as just typical presentation for the game, but in this case I feel like it was a lost opportunity due to the functionality of the Marauders map. And if there's one thing that is true to the game, it is easy to get lost in Hogwarts, and having a better map than what they gave us would have been far more beneficial than the 3D image that they gave you when you hit the select button, or the menu button, whatever, and that tiny little mini map in the bottom left hand corner, while being at the same time a tie-in to the lore similar to that of the Flu networks. So after all the initial introductions and you get free reign of Hogwarts, you get to go to Hogsmeade, which replaces Diagon Alley for the story and functionality of the game. With the most important part of going to Hogsmeade is to get your own wand. And here's another moment it kind of feels like, because the Harry Potter books did it, they added another Ollivanders to the story. Now, I think there might be something in the books about being a tradition of them making wands. I really can't remember. But it feels like because Harry Potter did it, we're going to do it in this game. Now, when you go and get your wand, they do the typical Harry Potter thing where you swish and flick your wand and see what the wand will do when you use it, resulting in various hijinks caused by mismatches in using the wands, followed up by eventually finding the correct wand. So the wand that you get isn't random. You actually get to customize aspects of the wand, what kind of wood, what kind of color, how pliable it is, and even what core it has. I mean, there's also its general shape and its length, and none of this seems to have any real effect in terms of combat or overall gameplay. Or if it does, it's not very apparent that it has any effect at all. And it feels like there were supposed to be parts of this that did affect your overall gameplay, and I cannot tell for the life of me if they did or did not. Particularly the core. I see no point in choosing the core, other than they mentioned it in the Harry Potter books, therefore we put it in the game. So after getting your wand and some other bits of school supplies, two trolls come crashing through Hogsmeade wearing some armor that is glowing, indicating that they're being controlled by the goblins. Your character, in a brave act of stupidity, decides to take one on. Yes, they've had combat through the prologue and throughout your time at the school. This whole entire phase is nothing more than a tutorial of how to play the game. It's not till afterwards in which you get freedom to explore not only Hogwarts, but the countryside as well, that the real combat comes into play. With that said, let's talk about the control of the game. For the most part, it's pretty smooth, and it's really easy to control your character and get your character to go where you want to go. It doesn't feel sluggish, and your character doesn't move too quick either. It's a very smooth experience. On top of that, they give you a wide field of view. That way you can see a bunch of detail in the game, which also helps in combat. And there's a lot of detail in this game. Visually, the game is stunning for the most part. There's a lot of detail everywhere, especially with all the included lore and other landscapes you come across, and in some cases, some of the events you encounter, like let's say in Hogsmeade, of wizards playing multiple instruments using magic. I said there's some small issues, like the character you see on screen right now, you can see her hair clipping through her robe. But another thing I noticed that all the mirrors in the game don't really reflect anything at all, which I found a bit odd for a game with this much detail not having reflections in the game. And it's not like this hasn't been done in the past. Both of these are just minor examples, and overall do not negatively affect the game. So let's talk about combat in Hogwarts Legacy, along with learning new spells as well. As you progress through the game, you'll learn new spells. with some of them having multiple purposes for puzzle solving, while other spells only have one specific use, and they're all color coded for what use they have. The red, yellow, green, and purple spells can be used in combat, and all of them except for the green spells can be used to interact with the world, such as solving various puzzles in the game, or interacting with various objects as well, getting you field guide pages that are out of your reach, or interacting with statues that you would say light on fire in order to get a field guide page. But the main purpose of the color coding is when you're in combat. Certain enemies will put up shields, and in order to break those shields, you can use various spells that are associated with whatever color in order to break the shield. The exception to this are the curses, the unforgivable curses in particular, that can smash through all of those shields. But in order to balance out the game, they added some pretty big cooldowns to the unforgivable curses. So you do have to use the various other spells in order to break these shields. And it feels like a very good use of maintaining balance between actually making practical use of these spells instead of just pure use for combat. You still need to use them outside of it for puzzle solving. Now, in terms of combat, it's not that complicated of a system. Like I said, you match the spell that you have with the shield that they are using in order to break it. But it's not exactly that simplicity. There is some complex combinations you can use. After you break their shield, you can use various other spells to, let's say, lift them up in the air, making them vulnerable to other attacks, particularly your basic attacks. And you can just chain those together, allowing you to do a great deal of damage to them without being attacked yourself. Now, there's one other source of magic that you can use for attacking, and that's the ancient magic. This is a bit of a trump card, and they balance it out by limiting how much ancient magic you can carry at a time. You can expand upon how much you can use. But in general, it has a tendency to one-shot most enemies, if not all of them, with the exception to that being, let's say, trolls, some of the larger spiders, and bosses. I had a tendency not to use it all that often because it didn't really feel like it was necessary outside of maybe, like I said, some of those larger enemies, like I said, trolls or some of the larger spiders. Mainly, it felt like it was way too valuable a resource to waste on smaller targets. And a lot of the attacks you do with the ancient magic are actually semi on the brutal side, such as slamming a wizard onto the ground, or goblin, multiple times, just blowing them up in general. And in some of the spiders' cases, you shrink them down and then you squish them. And I suppose I should say this right now, even though this is based in the Harry Potter universe, people die. You kill dark wizards and goblins and spiders and other various beasts in the game. And I can't help but sort of appreciate that because that definitely would be something that would happen in this universe. And does, even in the books. They may have toned it back a little bit in the movies, but it even happens there as well. So this brings me to the enemies of the game. You can more or less break it down into 3 different categories. Dark wizards / poachers, goblins, and beasts. With beasts having probably the most diversity in terms of their actual attacks and overall appearances. With goblins and dark wizards being more or less just skin swaps for the same enemy with slight variations between them. Kind of like when they would just swap colors back on, let's say, the NES to represent different enemies, even though they're pretty much the same enemy. And as much as I hate to say it, in terms of the beasts, the spiders are very much in a similar category. And I think they overuse the spiders a little too much, and it feels like they put the spiders in there because of the Harry Potter books and movies. And I'm also going to say they have mongrels, which are nothing more than wolves. And it feels a little bit cliche to use wolves, and rats would be in this category as well, as an enemy for this game. I mean, every fantasy series seems to do it. But when you have a fantasy universe where it has creatures that are unique to it, and you go ahead and just use some generic animal that's tied to fantasy, it just seems they didn't exactly put too much thought into what beast you could be fighting in the game. And one last thing that sort of bothers me about the various beasts that you fight with, say, trolls and some of the larger arachnids in particular. These particular enemies have a tendency to last way too long, in my opinion, and repeat themselves way too often as well. As you can see here, I'm fighting this giant spider. All I'm doing is dodging 3 times, attacking, killing the ads, dodging 3 times, and attacking. Trolls just dodge, throw the rock back at them, block it, dodge some more, get a few attacks in here and there, then dodge some more, block the rock, throw it back at it, dodge some more, get some more small attacks in. And it just lasts way too long. And that's even with the use of ancient magic as well. So with that being said, let's talk about the beasts that you actually interact with and capture out in the wild. There are 14 that you can capture. Some of them are tied to side quests such as unicorns or the phoenix, and you only get 1 phoenix. So these beasts provide various animal material that you can use to enhance your equipment that you're wearing. So getting materials from these various beasts is similar to that of, let's say, some farmy games like Stardew Valley, where you brush the animal and then you feed them as well and you get the material. There is a bit of a long cooldown on it, around 30 minutes for every single last beast, which I feel is a touch too long. But other than that, it's not a big, huge chore to gather materials from the various beasts. It's not as involved as, let's say, Stardew Valley, where you actually have to go and harvest your own food for the various animals that you are raising and taking care of. The one aspect I don't understand, and I have a little bit of an issue with, is that you can breed the various beasts that you captured. I'm not sure if it's supposed to be some convenient way of getting more of the same type of animal without having to go out and capture them, but there are multiple spots in which you can capture the same beast over and over again. And on top of that, the whole idea is that you're rescuing these beasts from the wild to protect them from the poachers. And here you are filling up your various vivariums with bred animals. I kind of can't help but that the whole capturing animals to save them is sort of a means to make money in the game, because you then take the various animals that you do capture to a woman in Hogsmeade, in which she'll give you money for rescuing them. I'm using air quotes for the rescue part. So it didn't feel like I was actually rescuing them. It was just a means of earning money. On top of that, I don't know if I just didn't have the babies around long enough. Most of them did not grow up. So I was very confused by this aspect of the game. Now, let's talk about the room of requirement, which the vivariums for the beast are located. It does feel like the room of requirement was added because it was in the movies and books. But on a narrative side for the whole entire game, it makes sense since you are a 5th year student who's never learned magic before, needing a space in order to practice your various magics, potions, and other bits of coursework while you're attending Hogwarts. Functionally, it doesn't do that. For me, it served as my main source of plants. You can decorate the room of requirement with whatever transfiguration that you find in the game. And I never got into it and I never decorated it. Like I said, the only thing I really used it for was for potting plants. In particular, Mallow Sweet, due to how much of it you actually need to use in the overworld map completing the Merlin challenges. I mean, I also had a potion station, a loom for upgrading my equipment, and a few other things for crafting. But otherwise, I made a few pieces of furniture here and there and just got bored with it. I'm sure there's plenty of people who indulged in it and made some really nice setups in their game, but I did not. Now, let's talk about voice acting before I get to the overworld, because I wanted to mention this and I kind of skipped over it. Now I'm going back to it. Again, the voice acting's pretty good in the game. You can understand what they're saying. It doesn't seem forced or over-exaggerated, and it doesn't feel like they went with a first take and said good enough. There are 2 notable characters, though, in this game that I was sort of like, what? Here, let me play one for you.
Hello. Were you calling me? I was, yes. Thought perhaps a fellow Hufflepuff might have the perseverance to join me in a bit of an adventure. Following a treasure map, to be precise. Slight respite from battling the odd troll, I should think.
No, I'm not making fun of Arthur here. After all, he's a fictional character. The thing is, the way he sounds feels extremely exaggerated. And I'm not familiar with British accents, so for all I know, that is possibly what people sound like, but it sounds out of place in comparison to the overwhelming majority of voice acting in this game. Now, the voice acting that drove me nuts more than anybody else's was my main character's. Not because it was bad, because of technical issues. Even after updates, it still happened. Let me play a clip for you.
Good news, Mr. Weeks. With your upgrade, I was able to set a new record at the Irondale course.
Brilliant! I knew the upgrade had fantastic potential. How did your broom feel?
It rides well. Does get a tad shaky at top speed, and the handle wobbles a bit when I hit a strong gust of wind.
Ah, yes.
So for the whole entire game, my character had this slight echo to it. The whole entire game. Every time he spoke, it sounded like that. And I think it was tied to the pitch, because I made a male Ravenclaw character who didn't have it, and I didn't mess with the pitch. The female characters didn't have that issue either, but I didn't mess with the pitch again. Otherwise, outside of those few examples, the voice acting was excellent. Now, let's talk about the overworld in general, mainly the areas outside of Hogwarts and Hogsmeade. Now, I'll give them one thing. They avoided the Assassin's Creed map to tower mechanic that a lot of games have been recycling for the past decade and a half. And I'll give them props for that. So, in the overworld, there are more side quests that you can take part in. You can find wild beasts to rescue. And there are also the Merlin trials, which I mentioned earlier, that allows you to increase the number of items you can hold in terms of your gear. And there's also challenges here and there that increase the amount of ancient magic you can use as well. Along with various caves that have treasure in it that give you a better chance of getting better equipment than what you already have equipped. And like I said, the visuals for this are actually just as pretty as Hogwarts is. Maybe a few too many spiders. Honestly, the Forbidden Forest, I would just burn it down and use my ancient magic to regrow more, which is part of the story in this game. So I see no problem with that. But because brooms exist in the Harry Potter world and it's one of their forms of transport, they added it to the game. I have no real problem with the controls of the broom. It's pretty smooth for the most part. Feels a touch slow even when you're boosting. But other than that, it's actually better than the hippogriff that you get, which is part of the story. And I suspect they give you the hippogriff because you have to buy the broomsticks. But unfortunately, both kind of break the world exploration and some of the puzzles on the overworld map. You can just skip over enemies with zero repercussions, with zero effort into avoiding any conflict, outside of, let's say, story or side quest scenarios. You can even gather materials while on the broom, and it's not like it's an inconvenience to get off and then get back on again. Now, they do give you one additional beast that you can ride, a Graphorn, but you get it so late in the game it kind of feels pointless outside of the scenario you get it in. Yes, I had the option to use it, I just never bothered because I had a broomstick and a hippogriff. It felt like some attempt to add combat while mounted, and I don't know why they just didn't add poachers or dark wizards on brooms to sort of bypass players just flying willy-nilly over everything and add some tension or even some elements of gameplay while on the broom. So lastly, let's talk about the story of the game. It starts off with your character and Professor Fig in London being joined by a man from the Ministry of Magic, with the background that you are a fifth year starting their very first year of actually going to wizarding school. There's no explanation for this. I mean, there is, in a way, but there's certain elements that I feel like that are missing from this. Like, how did they find out that you had magical abilities that just manifested out of nowhere? And considering they have a line that says that's a rare thing, it seems to be so rare that I'm not sure why you're not a guinea pig being tested on. I mean, after all, if certain people don't develop magical abilities as children, are then labeled as squibs. Anyways, at some point, the man gets eaten by a dragon, and your character then is able to see the Thestrals pulling the carriage, which is in line with the lore. After all, when you see somebody die, you are then able to perceive them in reality. So Professor Fig and your character are falling, and he grabs a hold of your character, who then summons a key without a wand to him. So wizards aren't supposed to be able to use magic without wands. I suppose a minor detail. But the key was also located in a case that didn't open until your character touched it, saying that there was a strange glow. And the key was an actual port key, porting them to somewhere in Scotland. Unfortunately, I don't have any footage of the prologue of the game. When I started actually recording it, they did a couple of updates, and after that, OBS did not like recording the footage. I had to use the recording tool of the Xbox Game Bar in order to get what I do have. But your character goes to this little castle that's crumbling on this very perilous looking chunk of land, and you find another symbol similar to that on the case that the key was in. It allows you to pass through the wall, and you find yourself on the other side in Gringotts, which sort of feels like another one of those moments where, because it was in Harry Potter, we're going to put Gringotts in this game. Some sort of artificial way to squeeze it in, but I guess it sort of ties in with the story, considering it involves goblins and their rebellion. Or uprising, I'm not really sure if it could be called a rebellion. Anyways, one particular goblin takes you to a door and he locks you in. After learning the Revelio spell, you find an entrance and it takes you into another Tolkien-esque sort of scenario in a very dark room with a bunch of pillars. This prologue also acts as a basic tutorial for combat, teaching you how to do the basic attack and how to block as well. Fighting off a bunch of, I don't know if they're sentient, but animated statues that try to kill you. It eventually leads back into Gringotts and a pensive, where you see visions of 4 wizards casting magic, revitalizing the countryside where there's a bunch of dead trees and there's no water and stuff, and it's making it rain. But you also see a little girl who indicates that she can see what's going on. And after that, you're introduced to the main villain, Ranrock. He is a goblin obsessed with rising to power and pretty much destroying or killing every single last witch or wizard he can find. After he kills a fellow goblin and you make your escape, you find yourself near Hogwarts, and then you go to the sorting ceremony. And as you progress through the game, more chapters of the story unlock. So this eventually takes you to the restricted sector of the library, which again feels like because it happened in Harry Potter, we're going to put it in the game as well. This section leads you to a book, but there's pages missing. And this is where your house comes in, and it's the only time the story differs in any shape or form depending on your house. All the scenarios involve one particular ghost, Richard Jackdaw, who seems to have a reputation for being a bit of a thief. Or maybe a ladies' man, maybe a lovesick puppy, so to speak. So each house has a bit of a unique quest when it comes to finding and meeting Richard Jackdaw. Slytherin gets to help the headmaster's house elf try and recover a ring, and in the process find Richard Jackdaw. Ravenclaw is actually kind of the most boring. You just solve a really basic puzzle in the Owlery. Gryffindor, you get to go on the Headless Hunt, kind of again because it was in the books, we put it in the game. And Hufflepuff probably has the most unique of them, because it's the only one that semi takes place outside of the whole entire game. or at least the overworld that you can explore, and they get to go to Azkaban. So Richard Jackdaw went missing, and the blame for it was placed on a woman named Anne, or I should say, a student named Anne. And apparently, without much evidence, she was sent to Azkaban, where she was kept, and kind of went insane. Considering that it's Azkaban and its reputation, it makes sense. And I'm going to go off on a bit of a tangent here. I don't know why they have Azkaban. I mean, to some degree, yes, when you have mass murderers, sure. But they also send people here for what I would consider petty or even minor crimes, and it seems overkill. Anyways, you get to accompany a former Aura, and you get to go talk to her, and she gives you clues on what she was doing, so you can meet Richard Jackdaw, which involves solving a puzzle. I mean, after you went to Azkaban, it sort of pales in comparison to what you just did. And a bit on the anticlimactic side, I might add, considering the woman who takes you there also gets injured by Anne. And I didn't play long enough on my Hufflepuff character to find out if she made it out okay, considering she looked like she was in agony, or if Anne got released. And to be kind of honest, I don't know if she could be released based on the state that she's in. I suppose she would be relocated to St. Mungo's for the rest of her life. Is probably the best case scenario I could come up with. Anyways, after each and every single last different scenario, you meet Richard Jackdaw on the edge of the Forbidden Forest. And he tells you where to go in the forest to find the entrance of the cave that he entered where he died. You eventually get there, you defeat a handful of goblins that followed you, you do some light puzzle work, kill some more spiders, and you find his corpse. He's been decapitated by the statues. You find the lost pages on his corpse, and you make your way out and you find another pensive, showing another memory of the 4 wizards that were bringing life back to the village and the surrounding area from the previous pensive. The little girl in the memory, Isadora, is now a 5th-year student, much like yourself, who was able to see the ancient wisp of magic. And I'm pretty sure this cutscene has strong implications that the ancient magic is why you didn't manifest any magical abilities until you were the equivalent age of a 5th year. But it's extremely rare at this point, and even rarer by the time your character comes around. So this eventually leads to a map room located underneath Hogwarts, along with 4 portraits on the wall, each frame containing a spot for one of the keepers, which is what they call themselves. All of them at one point were professors at Hogwarts, and one of them was even a headmaster. Each of them gives you a trial as you progress through the game, and you find out what happened with Isadora. So I'm going to give a spoiler warning. I'm going to cover some of the aspects of the end of the game or part of the story. So Isadora eventually becomes a professor at Hogwarts herself after traveling the world. And she was researching the ancient magic and finds a way to remove people's pain, which became an obsession for her after her father more or less shut down after losing her brother. And you can see that it also negatively affected her as well. She was able to remove the negative emotions associated with the loss of the brother, thus helping him. But in later memories, it shows that she started to go a little too far in that she drained her father completely of all emotions, turning him into a living husk, and even took something from one of the professors without permission. This accumulates in her joining with a goblin to contain said magic that she withdraws from people. It also allows her to enhance her use of magical abilities as well. So after San finds her father a husk, and Percival finds out that she's experimenting on students, they find her underneath Hogwarts where the last reservoir of magic that she created in conjunction with the goblins. Or I should say, a particular goblin who is the ancestor of Ranrock. And his ancestor kept diaries, and that's how he found out about the ancient magic, and he's going around trying to collect it so he has the power to destroy the wizarding world. So all the teachers go to the chamber located underneath Hogwarts and confront her, and she is experimenting on students, and she's taken quite a bit of, I don't know, emotions transformed into ancient magic from them, and they get into a fight with Isadora knocking one of them unconscious and the other two trying to fight her off in vain, with San, feeling like he obviously has no other choice, uses the Avada Kedavra spell on her, killing her. Which this is hinted at heavily as you progress through the game, particularly one side quest following one of your classmates who is a Slytherin. In particular, you assemble a frame and she's missing from it, even though it's supposed to be hers. So this eventually leads to a conflict between the teachers and the goblins underneath Hogwarts, and a fight between you and Ranrock, which obviously was going to happen. This fight took a little too long. It wasn't that challenging. I will admit it's the only fight that caused me to use multiple Wiggenweld potions to heal myself. So just like the books and the movies, the course of the game takes place over the school year, but you really don't feel it or even can tell outside of maybe decorations that are around Hogwarts. And just like Harry Potter and all the movies, it ends on a note of your house winning the House Cup, with some special bonus points due to your actions that you took throughout the game, especially the ending part. Again, because it happened in the books and the movies, it happened in the game. It felt like another lost opportunity, sort of to compel people to actually do better, to add a little bit of challenge to the game, like in terms of listing off knowledge of the game or something like that. Particularly around, let's say, mechanics or something. Or not getting caught while being out at night. Or even add some weight to your actions or messing up in the game, giving you points or subtracting points based on how well you did. Making it so that even though, yes, you beat the game, you still lost the House Cup. And I almost forgot the most important part of the game. You can pet cats. Can't become one, but you can pet them. Overall, I would say the game is pretty good. I had fun for the most part. There are a little too many sections of the game that feel like, yes, they did it because the movies or books did it. And in some cases, they tied some elements from the books and the movies into the game perfectly, or near perfectly. Like the flu powder, for example, or the room of requirement. Although the combat, for the most part, is on the simple side, there is some complexity to it. And in general, it felt satisfying outside of any battles that dragged on too long, like the trolls. And one of the things I like to look at when I buy a game is how long did I play it? And how much did I spend on it? In this case, I have about 76 hours between all 4 characters. Definitely giving me my money's worth. The one thing I will gripe about is the Dark Arts Arena that you can buy separately, and it's $20. That might provide 10 minutes of gameplay, and repeating it isn't all that great, so I have no idea why they thought that was worth $20. It was worth the equivalent of $10 when you bought the $70 version of the game. Or whatever it was. I bought the cheaper version, mainly because I had things I needed to do, and I needed to remove the temptation to be playing that game 3 days early. Outside of that, it is worth every penny that I've spent on it so far. Unfortunately, I am a bit of a completionist, and maybe played it a little too much to the point where I don't really feel like I'm going to play it again anytime soon, if at all. Maybe if there's a sequel. And I'll give some advice to people who are completionists like myself. You can zoom out on the map and see what you have and haven't found when you're in the overworld. On top of that, you're going to have to get used to the Revelio spell, along with the Hogwarts sort of chime every time you pick up a field guide page. And there's a lot of field guide pages. So, if you're a Harry Potter fan, yes, I would definitely give this a try. If you're sort of a casual gamer, this has got a lot going on. It's not too difficult, it's fun, it's entertaining, it has somewhat of an intriguing story. It's a gorgeous looking game with a lot of visuals in it. And if you were teetering on the edge of whether or not to buy it, I would say go for it, or at least find a way to rent it or borrow it. Definitely play the game. So, if you made it this far into the video, thank you for watching. I know it's a little bit on the lengthy side, which is sort of par for the course for me. So if you made it all the way through, thank you for watching. Have a good one.